Okay, our first, next thing on the agenda is our guest presenter, Annette Smith.
Thank you.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Annette Smith. I'm Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment, which was started 20 years ago to deal with a $1 billion natural gas power plant and pipeline project proposed for southwestern Vermont, heavily endorsed by Governor Howard Dean. It did not happen, and I was going to go get my life back. And then a big mining company announced they were going to open a new mine a mile from my house, and I said I'm not taking them on, and I got drafted to do that, and that was another 4.5 years. And in the intervening years, we've been working with citizens, dealing with the interface primarily with industrial and residential areas. So we've worked on large farms, quarries, landfills, drinking water disinfection, interesting topic. For the last 10 years, I've been working a lot on renewable energy and have spent a lot of time on, at the Public Utility Commission and assisting citizens in participating in the regulatory process, which I've also done with Act 250 and ag permits and A&R permits. So I'm sort of a process geek. And so this topic of enhanced energy planning I have learned about from a couple of different perspectives. For the last more than a dozen years, I've been on the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, a couple times elected chair of the Ad Hoc Energy Committee. I've also been on my town's planning commission, and I'm currently not on either, but I have really tried to understand the challenges that towns face in addressing energy projects of all types, not just solar or wind, but we've dealt with transmission lines, with Velco's power lines, and natural gas power plants, natural gas pipelines. So that's the perspective that I bring to this topic tonight. So I put together a presentation. This is a very, I don't know, at the same time it's boring. On the other hand, I'm going to try and make it interesting because it's complicated. And if I succeed tonight, it will be to demystify it a bit for you so that you leave here understanding what you can do, what you can't do, what you may not want to do, what you might want to do. And you're not alone in dealing with these challenges because every community in Vermont is dealing with the same thing. And the different regional planning commissions are not consistent in the advice that they're giving. I gave a presentation similar to this in Wethersfield in March. There was a representative of the South Windsor Regional Planning Commission. There were 6 towns represented, and we had a really good discussion. And I hope tonight that we'll also, I want to hear from you all too, and if you want to interrupt me or anything, that's fine. So first is a little history. How did we get here? And there's more history than this, and it's at the back. I'll show you that later. But in 2016, there was, for lack of a better term, a Green Vest Energy Rebellion, where Vermont League of Cities and Towns partnered with some of us to bring in people from towns all around Vermont who were frustrated by the fact that they were not having a voice in renewable energy projects as they went through the Public Utility Commission. And so there were people talking about solar, about wind. Primarily those were the topics, and it's all video recorded. And there was very interesting testimony. Fish and Wildlife heard testimony about the impact on grassland bobolinks. And so it's a wide variety of things that people have talked about. That particular year, the bill that became Act 174 was the subject of the veto session. So it didn't exactly breeze through. It could have gone one way or another. That's me having a standoff with the Speaker of the House, Jack Smith. There are people there from Ferrisburg, Irisburg, and Fairfield. And honestly, I could have gone either way on this bill. I was very worried about this particular aspect of it and saw it was potentially problematic for towns and planners. So the pitch from the legislature is it gives towns more say. That was the primary talking point that came out of the passage of this legislation. Now, there's a link there to the Public Service, Department of Public Services set of standards. There's a lot of information on that page. I'm not going to overwhelm you with the documents that are the standards, but that's where you want to go if you want to look at the different checklists that they've established. The standards were actually established during the Shumlin administration by Commissioner Chris Recchia, who lives in Randolph, and then they were slightly revised, or the implementation of them was revised by the new Commissioner of Public Service, June Tierney, who also lives in Randolph. So you're lucky you. You have both the commissioners responsible for all of this in your the legislature, by statute, established you cannot deny any particular technology, and in particular, coming from the Shumlin administration, that really, from my perspective, was about industrial wind. However, Commissioner Tierney modified that to say you can't ban wind, but you can ban, you can say no to industrial wind while saying yes to other types of wind. So as long as you accept some type of wind energy, then you're good. But you can't ban solar, you can't ban hydro. The legislation was mandatory for the regional planning commissions. And initially, even before the legislation got passed, there were 3 pilot regional planning commissions, of which yours, Two Rivers Ottaquechee, was one of them. The other 2 were Bennington and Northwest. And they were required to come up with compliant plans that met the standards. Addison County was the last one to do it, but all 11 of them currently have DPS compliant plans, which means they had to be submitted, they got comments back, and then they got approved. However, this is not mandatory for municipal planning commissions. And so you don't have to do it. You can if you want. When it first got going, municipalities had to submit their plans to the Department of Public Service, and so 3 were submitted that way: New Haven, Benson, Sudbury. I know Bennington also went through. No, I think Bennington did not go through that way. And now that all of the regional plans are certified, all of the municipal plans go to that regional planning commission for certification, and the Department of Public Service is not involved anymore. So the incentive to do enhanced energy planning is entirely related to energy projects and a higher standard of deference at the Public Utility Commission. So currently the standard is due consideration for your town plan. Now in Act 250, that requires compliance with the town plan. One of the reasons I wasn't thrilled about this was because we already saw that cell towers have that substantial deference requirement and or option, and the PUC had already overruled towns with substantial deference over cell towers. So it's not a given that the PUC, which can use the public good to override anything, just because you go through doing this process doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily be listened to. But the way I view the difference is, with due consideration, they can say, yeah, we looked at it and we didn't think it mattered. With substantial deference, they say, well, we looked at it, but here's why we're going to ignore it. So they at least have to explain why we're ignoring it. Now, notably, this does not apply to anything having to do with transportation or heating, but those elements are required as part of the enhanced energy planning process. And I participated in, there were 3 focus groups that led up to developing these standards, and I participated by invitation of the Department of Public Service in one of them, and it was the transportation focus group. And at that, there was discussion about how, there's really no incentive, there's no carrot to the towns to do anything on transportation or heating when all you're getting is related to energy generation. So it's sort of, some people thought the legislature just should have said, give all the towns substantial deference on their plans and not put people through this sort of thing. But this particular part of the enhanced energy planning is entirely about siting. So, what is the Public Utility Commission looking for in municipal plans? And that's been a real mystery. So at the bottom there's a link, and I've given Attorney Dingledine the digital version of this. So all these links are available in the digital version and will be made available to all of you. So at one point, before Act 174 passed, I read dozens and dozens of decisions by the Public Utility Commission to try and understand what they were looking for in municipal and regional plans. And so that's a 30-some page document that is simply excerpts of the relevant portions. And in pretty much every case, the decision would say, the town has not set a conservation goal for this site, or the town does not have a clear written community standard for the site. So those were the basic two things they were looking for. Now, they gave a little hint, and this language comes from the net metering rule, where they actually wrote what they're looking for. So the first standard to identify a clear written community standard is designate specific scenic resources in an area where the project is proposed. So, for instance, the general statement, agricultural fields shall be preserved, wouldn't qualify because the statement doesn't designate specific resources as scenic. The statement, the agricultural fields to the west of Maple Road are scenic resources that must be preserved. Okay, so you're going to do that for every parcel in town. How do you determine what scenic resources you want to preserve? It's a very tough standard to meet. Around this point in the meeting in Weathersfield, the regional planner used the word impossible. And I said, oh, I would have said that later on. So, okay, the next one provides specific guidance for project design. For example, the statement, only dwellings, forestry, and agriculture are permitted within the Maple Road Scenic Protection Area would be a clear standard because it states with specificity what type of development is permitted. But the statement, all development in the Maple Road Scenic Protection Area must maintain the rural character of the area would not be a clear standard because it doesn't state with specificity what type of development is permitted. Got that? Those are the two pieces of guidance that the PUC has given. That's it. So my interpretation of this is that you need to have a standard specific to a site. You need to get out your crystal ball and figure out where a developer is going to come if you want to protect a site. So this really comes down to sort of two different ways of looking at it. Do you want to enable development, and if you do, where do you want it? That may be a little easier if you have a landfill, if you have a gravel pit or quarry. Do you want to protect a site from development? Do you want to protect your forest? Do you want to protect your agricultural fields? Well, you can't just say, we want to protect those things. You have to look at specific areas on maps. I came across this. It's not in the currently adopted town plan. This comes from Mount Holly. And I thought it was a very interesting approach. I've never seen anyone else do it, but at one point somebody drove around and they identified on a map the areas that they thought were scenic. Now, since this Act 174 passed, I don't think that any decision has come down from the PUC based on it. And so the only thing we have still is the older town plans that have not got enhanced energy designation. So we don't know yet what would be allowed. I mean, it's really, and I think attorneys will say this, and by the way, I'm not an attorney, that it's really like throw things at the wall and see what sticks. That's what a lot of people feel about how the PUC process works. And so you don't know. But the fact is that the Public Utility Commission to date has denied only one solar project. And it was one that was 0.8 of a mile from Mount Philo. It was denied on public investment. It was 144 kilowatt. And the Agency of Natural Resources was concerned about the investments they'd made in Mount Philo. Before that, the PUC did deny one in Bennington over a clear written community standard. And that was a case that I helped the citizens participate in. And it started in 2014. It's still going on. It has a sister case that is under appeal to the Supreme Court. Oral argument was yesterday. And the oral argument was entirely about how the PUC denied this first case because they said the town plan contains a clear written community standard, and then they approved the sister one in the same location, under the same town plan, saying, we're not bound by that past decision. And so the argument made yesterday, you can go listen to it on the Vermont Supreme Court's oral argument page, was about how there's a legal term, collateral estoppel, that they can't just be, they're being arbitrary, they can't just take it back. That particular case, we can go into more later. The situation in Bennington is worth noting. We'll get back to that. And I know more about it than I ever wanted to. So there's another interesting case called Rutland Renewable Energy that was fiercely fought by the Rutland town. Between the neighbors and the town, they probably spent $200,000. It happened to be on some of the finest prime ag soils in Rutland County. And I drive by it when I come here, and it makes me sad every time I go by, because the farmers in Rutland have been looking for an Intervale type place for more than a decade. And they had just gotten a contract to grow food for the hospital right down the road from this site. And so the neighbors even offered the company land elsewhere. They offered them money to start over, and the project got built, and over the objections of the town. Two interesting things came out of that decision, at least two. Before that decision, the PUC had developed a different standard. Some of you are probably familiar with Act 250 and the Queechy analysis, and is it shocking and offensive to the average person? Now, the PUC has never denied a case being shocking and offensive to the average person, but still, they didn't consider the neighbors the average person. And so they were throwing out the neighbors in every single case. And so this case caused, the Supreme Court said, in determining whether there's been an undue adverse impact, considering the sensibilities of the adverse person, the board can and should consider all vantage points, including from private property. That was a very beneficial change. The other thing that we're seeing the PUC cite now that is worth noting is that this decision says that only regional plans can address cumulative impact. Now, Rutland Town has seen a lot of solar development, and so they're concerned about the cumulative impact, but they, the Supreme Court affirmed the board's analysis of compliance with the requirement for orderly development on the overall impact on a 3-county region. I mean, so a town cannot determine or address cumulative impact. Only the regional plan can address cumulative impact. And I'm not sure that regional plans have really absorbed that yet, but we are seeing it in decisions like in Bennington, in some of the decisions that are coming down on these solar cases, even though there appears to be a cumulative impact of like 5 projects, that's not something that the municipality itself can address. So I'm going to now look at what tools are available for helping planners in looking at siting. The first is a statewide issue, and that is this is a map from Velco's long-range transmission plan. And what the colors mean are the area in white up above is grid constrained because there's been way too much development. There's over 400 megawatts of generation up there, while there's an average load of 30 to 60 megawatts. And that's because of the wind projects, it's because that's where Hydro-Quebec's 200 megawatts comes through, and it's because there's been a lot of solar development, and probably because land is cheap up there. And so as you go further south, there is more capacity. So right now, there's a lot more capacity in southern Vermont, and it's also more expensive. So these colors, as they're graded, show which areas have capacity and which areas don't have capacity. At this point, this sort of thing is sort of a pet peeve of mine, because after all the years of looking at how developers are just choosing sites and then everybody reacts to them, it's...
Hello?
Hello?
Andre?
All right, you're on. Thank you.
So and here's another version of it, is Green Mountain Power Solar now. Green Mountain Power has said in meetings that I've listened to, we don't want more solar development unless it's in the right place. So how do you know what the right place is? At a Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission meeting held in January, there was a meeting with utilities where I learned for the first time that there are security issues and that the utilities aren't allowed to tell us where they need the power. Now, I think that's a real problem, because this map, for instance, shows the red areas where, that's Addison County, they've had way, way more development than they can handle. The Rutland region and down to Bennington is challenged, and when you look at the key there, the actual reason is because of substations. It's not necessarily about the lines, it's about the lack of substations. So there's some of us who live in an area that has a 46 kilovolt power line that goes from Proctor down to Danby to the largest underground marble quarry. And a lot of us, including myself, had land next to this power line. And in the next town over, they had Green Mountain Power come in and say, can't we all tap into this? Because I mean, I have a really awful meadow, my cows won't even go into it. And I've scoped it out, it's good for a megawatt of solar. And they said, we can't do it because we'd have to build a substation, and nobody's going to want a substation built around here. So that's kind of what these colors mean, and it's something that's definitely worth looking at. So this is your town.
Hang on just a minute. Andre, can you hear okay? Can you hear Annette okay? Andre?
Yes, I can hear fine, thanks.
Great.
Good. So this is Randolph, and obviously you have some challenges with substations. And so the area of your greatest population also is your area that has the more expensive challenges in terms of getting energy development. Now the distributed generation that is already built is shown with yellow dots with green around them, and the squares are the substations. There is room over in East Randolph near Vermont Technical College and south of there. So this is a preliminary guide about where your town has room to develop renewable energy and where they don't. These are not necessarily showstoppers, but it is something that is a useful tool for you to understand.
Annette, can you go back to a slide for that? Because where Randolph Center is, if you go straight south, that's VGC.
Oh, that's VGC.
Yeah, East Randolph is on the other side of the valley.
Okay.
So Route 14 Valley.
It's in the green.
So what that means is that if somebody wants to develop in any of these orange areas, they are going to have to probably build a new substation or upgrade an existing, like you have, 5 substations. And so it's something that the developers have to pay for. It's not anything that the utility pays for, but they would have to invest in upgrading that substation.
Are they at capacity now?
Ask them. I'm sorry, that's exactly the sort of question that the utilities won't answer. And at the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, I was on the committee that would review applications by developers, and so I would regularly ask a developer, is there grid capacity for the project you're proposing? And the answer was that Green Mountain Power won't tell us until we've spent $5,000 for the pay-in for the system interconnect study.
Well, our local commissioner of schools applied to put in a thermal unit, and he was turned down by Green Mountain Power because they didn't have enough infrastructure. And he pursued it further, and he said they need to provide a new something costing $1 million. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, I don't know what particular thermal project would have that impact on Green Mountain Power, but the fact that so much of your town is being shown here in orange does mean something, as opposed to the green areas over there where there is capacity, but how much capacity? And one of the things that has happened in New Haven, for instance, is that because there has been so much merchant developer, where developers are coming in and putting 2 megawatt projects, and they have so much ag land to put it on, that it's used up the grid capacity, and for a while, the PUC was approving these projects, that even though they failed what was called the fast track analysis. And so finally, the town attorney for New Haven hooked up with an expert who used to work for CVPS, and he started reviewing these fast track analyses, and he determined that some of the projects that had been approved were overloading the lines by 120-some%. And so, and GMP was not saying anything, and the Department of Public Service wasn't saying anything. And so once the town said, hey, wait a minute, then the PUC started looking more carefully at what was going on. But they were just allowing them to just keep adding on and on. And so one businessman said he wanted to put up, I don't know, 100 and some kilowatts for his business and his home, and for net metering. It's the sort of thing that we'd all like to see being done. And he was denied because there wasn't enough grid capacity. So you do have to watch out for what, whose interests are being served, and if somebody comes in with a project that's going to use up that grid capacity, how much is left for local people?
Well, if a new company, and we're very involved in getting new businesses in here, doesn't know whether they're gonna be capacity, why would they ever come here?
Well, I think this is a conversation that you really need to have with Green Mountain Power. I mean, this is, you're all in Green Mountain Power Service territory.
Right.
And it's a discussion to have with the utility, and see what they will disclose. Because this, to me, it's put planners in an impossible position. You don't have the information necessary to choose a site or know how to move forward when you don't know what is available on the grid. Now, the grid can always be upgraded, you can add more to it, but this next slide.
Go back one more.
Yeah, I have a quick question
Sure.
on that too.
What is the relevance of the substations that you included here?
Well, that's on their map, and I didn't include it, they put it there. The substations are the limiting factor. So if you look at it on the larger scale here,
But a project doesn't have to connect directly to a substation, right?
yeah,
But they like to.
well, they need, one of the
Has to
things
be
that
distance.
developers do when they go out looking for sites is they look for what's closest to a substation, and then they look at what it needs to upgrade. And so pretty much any big project is going to need to do something with the substation, and a lot of them do. They might be able to tap into existing infrastructure, but it's their cost to bear as part of their project.
So we have a big developer, a second one, who's really after the one down on South Randolph Road, as you know.
East Bethel
East
Road.
Bethel Road.
East Bethel.
So,
That's the little,
you know,
Randolph Center one there.
Yeah.
for some businesses, it's not a huge cost of doing business, because the federal tax subsidies make this very, very lucrative for the big developers to come in and pay those kinds of costs. It's sort of the little guys that are having more of a challenge.
Well, and this is a super important issue for Randolph, because we are the home of Cadmount Solar that employs 60 or 80 people, I've forgotten how many. So if the grid capacity gets foreclosed, we lose all those jobs, which is the very thing that we're trying to do, is attract
And
businesses.
they're very concerned.
Well, you know, I really do think that the utilities need to be upfront and tell you what's needed where. And it shouldn't be this kind of mystery.
Could I ask a quick question on the East Randolph, that last map?
Yep.
Is the reason that would be green is because, I mean, that's exactly where the three-phase power is in that valley.
Well, so this is the next map I keep going to.
Oh, okay, all right.
That's your three-phase power.
Okay.
And that is actually not over in East Randolph. That is down,
I'm not sure, but there is up to Greenwoods and up to, coming up that valley. Three-phase
She
power.
doesn't go that far east.
there's nothing over there.
You're not
But,
that far, you're not
I'm
far
not,
enough east over,
but
yeah.
there's nothing there, I don't think.
There is three-phase power.
Is there?
Yeah,
I didn't think there was.
In Route 14?
yes,
Well,
yes.
It might be coming from another.
It's coming from Royalton.
this link will take you to
It's coming up the
the
14
GMP
valley.
three-phase power map, which I didn't know existed until this week.
Mm.
And I was pleased to see it, because I've been saying, they ought to show us where the three-phase power is.
Mhm.
And initially, I thought that these maps were really based on three-phase power. And then this is like, their 2.0, their 1.0 didn't tell us this was about substations.
Oh, I see.
I thought it was about three-phase power. But it turns out that it's about substations and, you know,
So
the
explain
capacity.
what three-phase power is, just very briefly. Why is this important that we're looking at a map that shows the three-phase power lines?
Well, that's another somewhat complicated question, but for the larger projects, they will be looking for three-phase power. And I understand
They'll
from,
be drawn to that because they would not necessarily have to do any upgrades to the lines or the infrastructure?
it's all, there's more infrastructure
They
there.
can get more power out of it.
Now, if, I've seen developers who have identified sites that don't have three-phase power coming to them, and so they will pay for an upgrade and an extension. There's, one of the Bennington cases has a mile-long extension of a three-phase power line. So just because it's not here, doesn't mean that it can't be added, but it's what heavy equipment runs on, it's motors, and I've had people who work at GMP tell me that it's not absolutely necessary for some of these like 150 kilowatt projects, but I don't claim to understand why. But I've heard that a couple of different times. Suncommon has said it too, that they don't necessarily need three-phase power for some of the smaller projects. And actually, I don't really consider 150 kilowatts small, because it's still a, 3-acre footprint, maybe an acre footprint. But the 500 kilowatt ones, they're 3 to 5 acres, and those are actually pretty big, but they're still considered relatively small in Vermont.
Annette, do we know what the capacity is on the statewide level? Do we even know that information?
Well, that's what this Velco map is sort of about. And again, I wish Velco would be a little more involved in what is going on. The Shiai area, the northern part, the Sheffield Highgate energy interface, it's well known and well documented what's going on there. Because of Vermont Yankee shutting down, that's probably one of the reasons there's more capacity in southern Vermont, because there's all this,
Infrastructure.
yeah, it's all there, and so it's different in different areas, but this is the best that we know about from what's publicly available. Another tool is the energy dashboard, and this is something that I will say is not entirely accurate. I've had a few people tell me that they got it wrong, but it's a good snapshot if you want to look at where you have already got solar, roof-mounted, hot water. I'm off-grid. I've lived off-grid with solar for 30 years. I have a solar hot water system. For some reason, they have my solar hot water system on the map, but they don't have my my PV system on the map. So you can look and see your house. It's a little kind of, if you zoom in on it and click on it, it actually gives the name and the details, and I don't know, I didn't know they were going to go that much into publicly invading people's privacy, but
It doesn't show off grid sites though.
didn't show my PV, but it did get my hot water. Now, then another tool is the Vermont Natural Resource Atlas of the Agency of Natural Resources. So this is Randolph, and I turned on a few layers. I turned on impaired waters, so the yellow line to the east of I-89 is impaired, running right through Randolph. The tan is deer winter areas. There's some speckled stuff that is sand and gravel deposits. The yellow is hazardous sites. The green crosses are stormwater permits. And the green and pink are prime ag soils. The green is prime ag soils and the pink is statewide ag soils. And you can turn on all kinds of different layers. You can do forest blocks. It's a very interesting tool to play around with. I turned off some of the tools, the sand and gravel resources, and I guess I left quarries on because that's an obvious thing to look at for preferred sites, if you want to look at those, hazardous sites. I think in general, towns really kind of want to stay away from their ag soils and forests and try and we're seeing a lot of projects now being proposed for brownfields, gravel pits, quarries. They're real, and landfills, they're good sites and they don't have opposition and they go through really quickly through the PUC process. It's those sites that are challenged for a lot of reasons or different reasons, aesthetics, wetlands, forests, that make for not very good sites.
Yes. Sorry, just one quick question. On the previous slide, you had mentioned that the yellow squares are hazardous sites. Is that it? Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
And I think if you click on them on the atlas, it will should give you the information about what it
Okay.
is.
You can put the parcel IDs, the parcel
Yeah.
maps, you can put the property boundaries and stuff,
Okay.
so you can really,
Yeah, I was just curious because it looks like it's right on VTC Gifford Independent Living Site area right
It
above
does.
5, so it was a little confusing. I wanted just to confirm that I heard that.
I
correct.
also,
It can be a site of a former leaking underground storage tank like Floyd's store. I know they had a UST leak years ago. So that could be it.
and I also left on the landfills, which are sort of lower left with the red X's. Those are old landfills. So there's, some interesting mapping that you can do. I mean, if you like mapping, this is a great tool. And I happen to love mapping. And so I think it's a very good way to strategically look at your town. And you can turn on all kinds of layers and really try and understand, especially how to make use of already built landscapes. So this is one approach for identifying preferred sites. And this happened to come from your draft town plan that came from the Regional Planning Commission. And I did this also with Weathersfield's town plan, because I was curious to see if there was any similarity between this. So the draft that you got from Two Rivers says areas that are considered prime solar potential on the solar energy potential map of this town plan is considered preferred. Now, these preferred sites, what's happened with the ones that I've seen that have been done are that when you designate a preferred site and you put it on a map, that is the roadmap for the developers. So Sudbury has a preferred sites map, in came the developers. Bennington, preferred site map, in came the developers. So by doing a preferred sites maps, you're saying this is where we want solar development. It's not it's not a way to say this is where we don't want it. You have to do that with that language that I showed you earlier. This is where you say, developers, come on in, this is where we want you, and we want to build renewable energy. So I overlaid it on Google Earth, and so the map on the left is the map, and then I overlaid it on Google Earth on the right. And then I turned down the transparency. So I've got a few segments to show you. So this is on the left, just the map. In the middle, I turned down the transparency. And then on the right, that's what's below. Well, it turns out that of these light green, and light green is preferred sites on your map there, of those light green, almost all of them are actually forested. So there's one, here's another one, and here's another one. There was one field, and I'm sorry I didn't put the link into the Google Earth overlay, but I can add it to what I uploaded, and then you can click on it and download it, and you can open it up in Google Earth. It's a very useful tool for going around your town and looking at things. So I did enough of it, and then I looked at what was left. And when the three RPCs were doing these pilot projects, I went to the Bennington's presentation and said to them, could you do a map without the forest? Could you just show us what these solar resource site maps look like without the forest? And they wouldn't do it. And Weathersfield turned out to be exactly the same thing. More than 90% of their town with the solar resource map there was forested. Now, honestly, I think this is a very poor way to choose preferred sites.
Do you believe that's purely coincidence, or do you think it was somehow targeted in a way?
I don't think, I think it was not, thought out. I think it was just like, okay, if you want renewable energy, here's our maps, and every town was given this packet, and it has your solar map, it has your wind map, and it's just showing the resources. So I think this is what Braintree did, and it's just I would say it's a lazy way to do it.
Does your system show prime ag soil sites?
That would be on the A&R map, which you could then upload and overlay on Google Earth. But anything you want, that I haven't done that, but you could.
Could you do that?
You could do that. Actually, on the, this is already overlaid on the equivalent of Google Earth. So you can zoom into this and look in great detail at all these ag soils.
It'd be useful if you could map carbon sinks, wouldn't it?
I know. Well, I mean, isn't that what our forests are?
Yes.
And so, when I saw two towns were having, most of their prime solar sites were forested, this is a topic that the Agency of Natural Resources is expressing a lot of interest in now. They're pretty upset with all the sites that they're seeing that are forested, and they're looking at it as somewhat of a cumulative impact statewide.
And then I just want to clarify that I understand this. Who did the lime green up there? Was it the actual town, or was
No.
it Two Rivers?
No, it wasn't either. It was
Neither.
VGI, Vermont Geographic
Oh,
Information System.
thank you, that's what.
So all these packets that were
Got it.
given to the towns,
Got it.
they came from VEIC, Efficiency
Okay.
Vermont, they came from the state level. I was told by some of the planners that they weren't real impressed. Initially, some of the data was wrong and they had to rescind it, and some of the maps were wrong and they had to rescind them. So you can't take any of this stuff at face value, it's just,
Thank you.
Well, plus, isn't the solar resource map just showing where the sun happens to shine?
honestly,
Right, one of the criteria that come up with that prime designation, there's gotta be some kind of, algorithm or decision.
and you can go
Criteria,
ground
yeah.
truth it and see it on, in your town. Is this really a solar resource? I mean, I looked, early on there was a version of it, and I looked on my property, and they had like a north-facing hillside as a forested north-facing hillside. And I think they completely missed this 1 megawatt potential meadow that I have. So does this play out? I mean, I don't know of anybody who's actually gone around and looked at what these are actually mapping.
It
But
has to be just where it's facing southwest.
No, it doesn't, because that site
She's just
up
saying.
here that they have proposed for Randolph on East Bethel Road, a lot of that is north-facing slope forested land.
So does that mean it's messed up or what?
It's not accurate.
Maybe.
The maps aren't accurate. That's why the planning commission, we held up on the maps.
yeah,
Because we represent the people who own the
Who
property
own
on
the
those
property.
maps. And we didn't want to get the maps out there. We knew we were gonna upset people till we get enough information.
so we're gonna
That's
look
why
now
we didn't do the maps.
at some of the maps that have been done. Okay, this is Bennington's map, and it has been adopted. There is a developer who is challenging Bennington in many ways, and the projects that are being proposed that have gotten the town sued are up here and over here. Now, one of them, that one, is a preferred site, but the other ones aren't. And the developer, after the town had adopted its plans with this map in it, the developer wrote a letter to the Regional Planning Commission's committee that was going to approve it and said, if you approve this, you will be signing the death warrant of the planet.
Hyperbole one?
No, they said that the planning commission would get sued, the town, like 6 different people or organizations
They
would
did
get
get
sued.
sued.
But it wasn't, the court I don't know which one, but didn't allow it.
Well, they sued the Planning Commission, the Select Board, they sued the Ad hoc Energy Committee, on this project, they sued V-Trans over the setback from the railroad tracks. They initially sued in Chittenden Superior Court, and then the town moved it to federal court, they withdrew it, and then it went to environmental court, and they lost in environmental court, but the town did not win its legal fees, and so eventually the town just caved, took a monetary settlement, and pulled out of all 5 sites, signed off on 5 sites, 2 of which hadn't even been applied for yet, just to stop the bleeding. There are only 2 other developers who are doing business in Vermont that I am aware of that have this history of litigation. This particular company is called Alco. Another one that has built a project in Vermont is Iberdrola, which then changed its name to Avangrid, and they own Central Maine Power, they own New York State Electric and Gas, they own Connecticut's United Illuminated, and they developed the Deerfield Wind Project on U.S. Forest Service land. They have a track record in other states of suing towns over ordinances they've passed. And the third one that has a track record of suing people and towns is Nextera. Nextera has sued a woman in Canada for mocking their label or their name after they cut down an active bald eagle nest with bald eagles in it. And they've sued communities out in the Midwest over ordinances that they passed or bylaws that they passed that aren't favorable to their projects. This one was really quite odd, but what has happened, this is being clear cut as far as for the solar project. And I believe this is in the town's industrial park, and a developer came in to put one in there, and there are a couple other developers that have come in almost as soon as the preferred sites map was out. There is a law firm that is contacting every single town in Vermont to find out if you've done a preferred sites map on behalf of developers, so that then they can come in. Okay, here's another one. This is Sudbury, which I mentioned. Now, Sudbury only did 2 sites, but what they did was they went around, some farmer went around and talked to landowners all around, and they identified these as good sites, and they both have applications for solar projects. And this one was one of the ones that was approved by the Department of Public Service. So no, they didn't do the whole town. They just did a couple of sites. So you can say, hey, here's our landfills, here's our quarries. You don't have to go all over town. Now this is not a formal map in any way. It's a draft map. The people in Tinmouth who I showed it to were like, where'd you get that? So there is someone in town who is a really good planner and who knows all about what areas are already conserved. And Tinmouth happens to have a lot of conserved land. And so when he sent me this draft plan, I said, did you talk to the landowners? And he said, no. He said, that's up to them if a developer comes to them to decide whether or not to do it. Okay, now the Tinmouth Planning Commission is wrestling with this topic right now too. And they went with me to, a couple of them went with me to Weathersfield. And they said, be sure to put draft on this because nobody who owns any of the land that's marked in yellow has actually seen it. But it is an interesting...
They don't know they're in the process.
They don't know that, but it's an interesting exercise. If somebody has the skills to do it, just to take a look at when you knock out everything else, what's left. Now here's another one. This is Benson, another one that has a preferred site. Notice that they didn't actually identify anything in particular, except to identify their constraints. And so I would say that everything left over is kind of like preferred locations for solar only within 1 mile. That would be your orange or your light orange, but I don't see any there.
Maybe that's the point.
Okay, impervious surfaces, preferred locations for solar only. Do you see any of those? Okay.
Maybe right in the middle, there's a very tiny.
Maybe there? Yeah, I don't know. So, all right, they did a preferred sites map. I'm not sure it helps anybody. I don't know. And then this one is a draft, and it is currently about to go up for public hearing, and it's Rutland Town. And I don't understand what they're doing at all. If any of you are familiar with Rutland, this is the Diamond Run Mall. I think making the parking lots preferred sites is good. This is GE, their parking lots are good. But this area,
It's a wetland.
it's massive wetlands. And I'm like, I don't know what you're doing here. And some of them were conserved, they were fought over when the mall was going in, they had to set some aside. I just don't get it. And then they have, okay, preferred sites for solar only, and note that within 1 mile of Threephase Power, that's always a parameter that the developers are looking for. So they have identified some that are possible. And Rutland Town, as I said, already has a lot of solar development, and so they are very close to meeting their target anyway. So I asked, do we have targets?
Yes, we do,
And
188.
so, okay, how are towns dealing with that?
What's that based on, Gary, 180 acres?
It's the numbers you get from the state.
That came from
It's in
T-Road.
state, yeah.
It's just a proportion of the.
It's
Yeah.
based on
town-
population.
town-
We have
of
18
population.
acres, we need 180.
And so, not all regional planning commissions are doing preferred site maps at all. Windsor, Wyndham, they're not doing preferred site maps. They're not required, you don't have to do them. So how are they meeting those targets? They are looking at what their overall capacity is for solar based on these maps, and they're saying, look, we only need to generate 130 megawatts, and look, these maps show we have 3,000 megawatts possible. That's enough. That's enough.
So these target numbers that were given by whom? The state?
The state,
regional?
yeah, they just took the population of the state, it's based on population, so it's not specific, for instance, to industry or residential.
Or to grid capacity in
Right.
the area that you're in?
That's right.
How do you deal with that?
Well, and some towns don't have much solar capacity anyway, or wind. And so when the Solar Siting Task Force was meeting, they had initially thought we're gonna divide it up and they're gonna be quotas. And my recollection is that they did away with quotas because they realized that not every town had resources that they could use. So this is a very rough sketch. There were a couple of other interesting things in the Rutland Town Plan. And I'm sorry for the small type, this isn't intended for you to read. It was just, it's in the packet, but they identified a set of criteria. Will this fly with the Public Utility Commission? I don't know. Nobody knows. Does it matter? I don't know. You throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. The site avoids environmentally sensitive wetlands. Well, that doesn't seem site-specific to me, you know? And some of them are kind of weirdly worded. But in any case, they're an example. Now, some towns have tried to limit total overall size of projects. Bennington, in its updated town plan, said that they didn't want any projects that were bigger than 10 acres. New Haven has, for a long time, had a cap of 300 kilowatts, which the PUC has just thrown out. These acreage things, I haven't seen a decision that looks at them, so I don't know.
That was the method we were trying to go, was by the acreage and the size of the array you could put on it.
It's
No
worth a
bigger than
try.
10 Big,
Yeah.
nothing bigger than 10 acres,
Yeah.
and it was gonna be the size of the array,
Yeah.
and not doing the math, so we weren't in the.
And then if you
preferred
tie
sites.
that to specific sites, I mean, this is why it is such an impossible task to
Mhm.
actually meet the standards that they've
Yeah,
set, but
yeah.
you're moving in the right direction.
We were doing it by the acres, because we heard from everybody it was the size.
So-
100 acres or 50 acres or
This
20
was,
acres was too much.
this was also from the Rutland Town draft plan. So you see at the bottom here, the target is a fraction of the town's generation potential. That by itself is sufficient to meet the requirements of meeting the target for energy planning. And so they look at how much they have and what the target would mean. So, that's siting. But remember, enhanced energy plans have heating and transportation components.
Can I just, about citing, I have a quick question.
Sure.
already by the state though, there's preferred sites, that we don't have to say like old gravel pits or
That
quarries.
for net metered projects, there's a
That's for
preferred
only
site.
net metered.
Net metered, and the rule is actually in an update phase, and
Okay.
tomorrow is the deadline for filing comments on that, if anybody wants to weigh in.
Okay,
They are recommending or suggesting eliminating the joint letter preferred sites, which I support and will be weighing in. I think the developers don't support it, so there's probably gonna be a fight over that. But they're not really messing with the preferred sites that developers can use that are gravel pits.
okay,
And what that means for the developers is they get a little bit more money.
yeah, yeah.
And over time,
Okay, well.
apparently it's enough money, although in the short term, it doesn't seem like a lot. Now, this information came from VAPTA, and it has more on it than it did when I looked in March, so it must be somewhat current, but it's not dated. So these are all the towns that have enhanced energy plans so far. I've shown you Benson, Sudbury, we looked at Bennington, and the ones that are in the White River, the Wyndham Regional Commission, they don't have preferred sites maps. I've looked at a lot of these, I don't think any of them have preferred sites maps. I don't know if any of these have preferred sites maps. So not everyone is doing the preferred sites maps, and it really is an option, and it really does invite developers if you want development.
So Braintree's right next to Randolph,
Right,
and they just took the map.
they just took
and
the map,
adopted.
and then they said everything that's shown here,
Mhm.
and I'm guessing nobody did this overlay evaluation to see what they're actually saying.
No, Jen's on from Braintree.
Well, they didn't want to go without a plan, so they had a deadline coming up, so they pushed it through, and we're now going over it again and tweaking it.
It's pretty easy to take that, you can take a screenshot of that solar map, and it's not hard to overlay it on Google Earth.
Well, they have Joan Richmond Hall there, who works at VTC, she well could have done that.
And so that's how I've done these analyses.
Yeah.
And I learned how to do it, so anybody can do that. So this is from Two Rivers, and this is your regional adopted enhanced energy plan. And it shows over time where, as a region, you're supposed to go. Okay, so how did they come up with this scenario? I attended a meeting of staff of regional planning commissions when the regional plans were pretty much done, and then they were getting guidance on how to direct the municipal planners. And some of the staff from some of the regional planning commissions were like, well, we have our own data, but if we extrapolate out, it doesn't match your 2050 numbers. And the advice that they got was, don't use your real data, just take what we give you because it's all made up anyway. Right? I mean, if you've ever written a business plan, you're just making it up.
Well,
So,
I think what's interesting to me about this is that they sort of foresee a 50% cut across the board in all energy uses. I don't know if any town is actually planning how to run the town on that. So that seems like a much bigger issue of import than where to put a solar farm.
and this
to me,
is,
that's just me.
well, this is where the other part of this planning process comes in. That really, I mean, I talked to one regional planner in the last week who said, I think there's been too much emphasis on siting. That this is the opportunity for towns to look at their whole picture and figure out how to reduce consumption, how to get people out of their, out of their cars, how to, and this is all sort of premised on we're all going to drive electric vehicles and heat our homes with air source heat pumps, and there's going to be more electricity. Well, there are some companies that are looking at hydrogen for cars instead of electricity. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, so I have a little
Can I
problem.
ask you a question?
Sure.
Have you seen this document
Yeah.
from the Energy Net?
Yes.
It says we have like 3,000 EV, and in like 5 to 10 years, we're gonna need 30,000 to meet the 2025, 30,
Right.
and so on. So
Right.
how the heck are we ever gonna do that?
Yeah,
Yeah. I
Could
mean,
I just go back to that one?
Afford it.
I have just a
Sure.
technical question. This solar thermal, what does that represent? What is that?
solar thermal
meant by? I
would
see it's like a
be,
little slice that's getting smaller, it's going
Yeah,
away. What is that?
Well, it would be solar hot water, like I have at my place, and I also, installed a solar hot water heating system, which works maybe 5 days a year. It was an interesting experiment, and, you know, it's one of those February blue sky days that you get it, or spring and fall, but we've had so little sun in the last 6 months. It's really surreal. I mean, having lived off-grid with solar for 30-some years, and I don't think I've ever seen an extended period of cloudiness. It's like, is the sun ever gonna shine again? And so I used to say I got solar hot water 90% of the year, and then I just used propane instant hot water the rest of the time, and now, like, wow. Not,
Annette, can we go back to my question? I mean, this is an impossibility.
I don't have an answer. You
The
know,
Two Rivers people said the same thing. They sat here with our commission and we said the same thing, and they said, yeah, it's
You're on your own.
ridiculous. We had no
You're on your
idea.
own, figure it out.
They're just going through the emotions, doing their job, they're delivering what they need to deliver.
I like that Freudian slip, they're going through the emotions.
yeah,
I said emotions.
No, you said emotions.
Going through the.
I mean,
Going through the
Yeah,
emotions.
this is in some areas of Vermont, there's a lot of hostility towards this top-down government telling us what to
That's what
do.
we wanna do it locally. We
And,
want it
and
to
so,
be handed to us.
consider this presentation as a 3-part presentation. This is, if you want to address the PUC and what they need, that was the first part. Now we're into what you're supposed to do, what you should do. The third part is, what do you want to do? So we'll get there.
But on that, in terms of solar, I don't understand that either. Why is solar showing that it's getting less and less to nothing?
That's
Well, just the solar thermal.
And the electricity, I guess, is.
You know, I don't understand why there isn't more emphasis on solar hot water, because it really works, and, you know, nobody's doing it.
Electricity, the food.
But, all right, where is
So
okay.
solar is part of electricity?
It doesn't
So
say
solar is
it
part of
says
electricity.
period, it doesn't say solar.
So this is total energy consumption. So this includes heating and this includes transportation. Now, I did it when I attended the transportation focus group. They actually had a huge amount of biodiesel in the mix I think they got rid of that, but
No, they got it.
is it?
Yeah, the green is
biodiesel?
going up.
Yeah, it's going up.
Pretty
So-
big.
Nobody uses biodiesel.
Well, supposedly we're all gonna grow a lot of what, canola or something, you know?
Well, another interesting thing is if they think they're gonna all have the electric cars, what you see of the slice of electricity isn't really changing, it's only increasing a little bit. So if all your transportation you're imagining is gonna go over to somehow be electric cars based on solar or
Right, your
coal or
gasoline
whatever,
is going down.
and the gasoline's going down,
Diesel's
somehow the
going
electricity is
down.
staying exactly the same, that also seems to make absolutely no sense.
Yeah,
Because wouldn't you be consuming all that much more electricity for all this stuff rather
no,
than?
because at the same time, we're all gonna
Gas and,
use less. That's
And
the,
everything's more efficient.
It's efficient.
No,
So
all
this
this
is
is less
from our
efficient.
original
this is
plan.
from your regional plan.
Well, we're gonna
Yep.
turn in our electric toothbrushes and all those things, right?
And
No, that's the last
there's the
thing.
link to
That's
your
the
regional
last
plan.
thing.
Yeah.
The cannabis thing,
So,
They say nothing of our cell phones.
this is your packet. Actually, this was the packet that was given to Braintree. And so it has all the different things in it. I thought I told your Randolph packet, but in any case,
Actually, it was a shared meeting with Braintree, Randolph, and Bethel.
Okay,
It was
so-
3 times, so it would have been the same.
you go to the Two Rivers website at that link, and every town's packet is there. And you can review them all, and so I'm gonna quickly go through this so you just see what you've got. That's your town's packet, plus the maps. I didn't put the maps in here, but you've got a wind map, a hydro map, you've got an existing generation map, and you've got a solar map and a biomass map. And so this gives you the data that they have currently, and then the heating energy use, the municipal commercial energy use. The current electricity use, I think, is actually the most interesting and valuable. And in terms of looking at energy planning, I think it's wise to separate out residential from commercial and industry. I mean, in the Rutland region, for instance, the town of Pittsford has Omea. Omea is the second largest user of energy the state. We have Killington in the Rutland region. We have GE has 2 plants. Are our little solar panels all supposed to fuel these things? So there was a total energy study a few years ago. I was invited to participate in one of those focus groups. They put me in the industrial and commercial sector. And so Beth Pierce, the state treasurer, was in it. And I made the comment, maybe we should separate out the residential from commercial and industrial. And they all agreed with me. So it's not, it's not a bad idea. But it's good to know. I actually don't find kilowatt hours as easy to understand as watts, but that's just me. And then they give you these targets. So residential, increased efficiency and conservation. So you're supposed to weatherize 100% of your homes by 2050. Commercial thermal efficiency targets. So those are the efficiency that's supposed to increase over time. Fuel switching, efficient wood heat. Now, I guess you're not going to use any wood. A large decrease in wood use is resulting in a negative number of targets. So the town of Timoth was given a draft plan from the Regional Planning Commission that the Timoth guy read me parts of as we were driving over, and it was like, we're going to stop heating with wood. And he said, Timoth is not going to stop heating with wood. I mean, so, I don't know.
And you don't really know where these came from?
Well, they came from the state.
Oh, the state.
These all came from VEIC, and they're giving the data to the regional planning commissions that then are tasked with giving to the town. So by a certain deadline, every municipality in the state was given this packet. And so new heat pumps for you guys, and electricity efficient targets for conservation, renewables for transportation. All right, so you're going to use
90%?
renewables to get to 90% by 2050, and even 9%, as Gary points out, that number is a lot of electric vehicles. I'd love to have an electric vehicle, but I can't afford one at this point. And I'm watching.
Plus you have to really map out where you're going and so forth. I mean, if you turn the
ranges.
heater on in the winter going someplace,
I've
you
heard
may
that
not get
it
back.
drops at like a third.
Right, you may not get back, exactly.
Well, and Toyota actually decided to put a lot of their effort into hydrogen fuel cells. So who knows? I mean, I've said more than once as I talk about this stuff, I don't have a crystal ball. How these people think they do. I mean, why aren't we planning out our food to 2050? Why aren't we planning out all sorts of other things to 2050 if we're going to engage in this? So I'm trying to be positive here about this, but this is what it is. All right, so renewable energy for heating, so we're all going to heating energy, renewable sources. So, I mean, this is where it really gets challenging, because when you live with solar, as I do, off-grid, the reality is I have to run a gasoline generator if the sun doesn't shine for days, which is what's been happening. So I have batteries, but batteries only go so far. And so it's that last piece. I mean, at one point, 60 Minutes did a show, a program about the Bloom fuel cells. And I'm like, wow, if that were to become available, that would be a game changer. So there has to be something that replaces that generator. And we haven't seen it yet. So when people are using their air source heat pumps at night right now, what are they running on? Primarily natural gas from the grid. And that's the reality. And people say, oh, I've gone solar and I have an air source heat pump. Well, after dark, you're not running your air source heat pump on anything other than grid power. And it might have some wind in it, but my issue with wind is that it blows at night, and that's when people need to sleep. And it's a real issue for the neighbors. And so the more the wind is blowing at night, that may mean that a gas plant isn't having to burn as much gas. But that also may mean that the neighbors are having a bad night that night. So renewables for electricity, target data, transportation fuel switching. So this is switching from fossil fuel to electric, and then biodiesel vehicles. So this is the answer for your town trucks and things like that. And then existing renewable generation. So this is what you have now. the potential, look at the potential you have. I mean, all you have to do an enhanced energy plan is put this stuff in a plan. That's all you have to do.
But if it's sort of garbage in, garbage out, what's
Yeah.
the point?
Yeah.
Well, then you get substantial deference at the PUC.
Well,
That's it,
anything.
okay? But you don't have to do a map that says we are going to identify sites for 2,099
Yeah,
megawatts.
that makes sense.
Got that?
Yes.
This is
And these
probably,
numbers are not Randolph, this is Braintree as an example?
no, this is all
This is
Randolph.
Randolph.
This is all Randolph, yeah.
We had a joint meeting with Randolph, Braintree, and
Okay.
Bethel, where they gave us all this documents,
Okay,
and it was specific for each town, and we had the maps and everything
okay.
in
Yeah.
front of us.
And so there are these 4 maps too, and 5 maps that go with it. But
That goes along
there's
with
a,
it.
this is where I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, that you have to do a preferred sites map, and that you have to identify all of these resources. That's not what the target's about. The target's about, do you have enough eventually to do it? Yeah, we do, okay, great, you've met that, check that. Sufficient land, look, you got 4,000% more than you need, and there's your target. All right, so this gets now down to what could you do that you'd want to do. And when I think about renewable energy and what challenges people are facing, I actually find myself somewhat aligned with what Green Mountain Power is saying and doing, and they're talking about microgrids. And so this is your population center in Randolph, and then this is over by the college. And these are your 2 largest population centers. So what would it look like if you either did a microgrid here, or if you tried to combine them all? And then, and so this is Google Earth, and that's the total radius. What would it look like if you then, hey, added in, what if we wanted to grow all our own food? What if we wanted to do something about the lack of local food at McDonald's? What do we do about all these people driving through in their cars? And I mean, if you really wanted to get into this type of thinking,
like systems analysis.
yeah, but it gets to social engineering pretty quickly, and so then you're actually making decisions where you could actually have a social score for people. But in terms of being,
Are we already there yet?
yeah, really, and in terms of being strategic about how to approach it, you do have a lot of tools available, and you know, look at where people live. And could you look at the electricity consumption of this area and the energy consumption of this area and figure out what areas might be useful to, and this is where it really comes down to what lands do you want to save and protect from development.
But bringing up the subject of a microgrid, is that something that Green Mountain Power, is that in their universe at all?
Yes, it
or-
is. They are doing
Okay.
microgrids.
So they broached this subject and
Yeah.
it's part of the
This is
discussion.
part of their, and this is Mary Powell is saying this
Because it does seem
more
more
and more.
resilient in the sense that if
It-
something blows out, you're not losing, you have
If you
smaller
did a
areas
circle
than-
around that and cut to, then you would be resilient, so they're talking about batteries. It's that generator piece I haven't heard them talk about yet.
Well, also transmission, I mean, the longer you transmit something,
That's
the more
right.
power you waste
Right.
over
So,
transmission.
and Mary Powell has said that their biggest expense, sort of like schools and busing, their biggest uncontrollable expense is the transmission
Yeah.
grid. And so the more that they can do locally, the fewer upgrades they have to do, the less far the power has to go. I mean, we've done renewable energy all along in this state. We've got 500 kilowatt projects far from load. We have big wind projects far from load. We've learned our lesson, right? So now how do we rejigger it so that we're doing it right? Digger?
I had a conversation with Kevin Jones, I think, at law school a couple of years ago, and he said, it's a great idea, but it's just so expensive. So the real issue is, how do we pay for it?
Right. Well, Green Mountain Power's doing these projects. They've got a microgrid project in Ferrisburg. They've got one at the Stafford Vortex School in Rutland. They've claimed that it has been beneficial when there's been power outages and when there's a need for people to go to a safe place like the high school, then they can just disconnect it from everywhere. it's sort of like all this other
So
stuff.
should we talk to, Green Mountain Power about having one here?
I think it's a great idea to talk to them not only about the grid capacity, but about what.
Well, you need to know both.
You need to know both, right. I mean, I recall that as Act 174 or S230 was in development, that it was part of the plan that the utilities would be involved with planners in this. And so it's been very disappointing and frustrating to not have the utilities at the table. And when you do talk to them, there's a pretty consistent thing that they've been saying. And I'm gonna jump ahead for a second here because I just wanted to show you what other things are here. So, we started with this little energy generation siting policy commission. You can adopt solar ordinances, there's setbacks, there was a solar siting task force, there's the Act 174 working group. This is a set of videos that are of interest to planners, and this last one is really interesting because the utilities came in and talked. It was Northfield Electric and Washington Electric and Green Mountain Power. And then the Public Utility Commission has been having informal discussions with parties, and some of these have been fascinating. In this one, I forget whether it was Washington Electric or Vermont Electric Co-op said that net metering is costing way too much money, it's raising the cost for their other ratepayers, it's unsustainable, and if they could cap it at 15 cents, that was where they wanted it to stop, because everything above that is profit. So there is this incredible tension between the utilities now and the merchant developers, because the merchant developers need to make a profit. The utilities, and this is true of Vermont Electric Co-op and Green Mountain Power, have said, and Vermont Electric Co-op said it last Saturday at their annual meeting, if you're thinking about doing net metering, please buy into our 5 megawatt utility solar project instead. The utilities can all do it cheaper, and of course then as regulated utility, Green Mountain Power is making a return on their investment, so they love owning generation. And that's a challenge to the merchant developers who have built up a business model around the...
Well, essentially getting subsidized by the utilities, in a way, because the utilities are
by
providing.
the ratepayers.
Well, yes.
Yeah, and so it's a delicate dance that hasn't been worked out, and that is kind of, I think, coming to a head as there just isn't that much money in the pie.
I was at a talk at the Energy Action, they had a speaker series from the 5 out of the 6, and there are people there saying there's lots of money out there. What we lack are the tools to get that money to the right places, and they have like 11 things we could look into.
So this is the challenge in trying to do anything. These are the mapping resources, the 3-phase maps, the energy dashboard, and those things. There is a map of electric vehicle registrations. I couldn't zero in on Randolph, so I didn't bring that, but it was from 2017. And these are some resources that we put together. I did a white paper on Vermont's energy policies last year. It has a section on a lot of these things: renewable energy standards, net metering rules, standard offer, the merchant and utility tension, and then there's a section in the back about ISO New England. There's a section on the Commerce Clause, and also about microgrids. And there's a link to that there, so you can, it's like Vermont's Energy Policy 101. And all of it is under discussion because it all needs to be looked at afresh, because it just, it's not working anymore. And so we've been doing a lot of videos, there's a lot of really interesting things there, and these links go to a huge amount of information that these folks compile, meetings and meetings and meetings. I mean, this siting commission, they held so many meetings, we didn't even video them all. There's just tons of stuff right there. And they looked at
Save some
every...
electrons that way.
Yeah, they looked at every other state and how they do siting, and it was not a successful effort. But in any case, putting these presentations together was kind of a chance for me to compile all this in one place, because I'm the only one who knows all this stuff is, all these videos are here, so, but now they're in one place. This was, they asked me in Weathersfield to do, just to give some sort of a sense of what you're looking at. And, the standard offer program, which I don't think your town has seen any of. Standard offer.
Can you explain what those categories are? I don't think folks are
So,
familiar.
net metering is what you're probably most familiar with. It's what Catamount Solar does. So, you want to put
Green
something.
Lantern, I think he's done a couple.
Yeah, Green Lantern, Norwich Solar Technologies
He
is
did one over
currently
in
doing
East
something.
Randolph and King Bridgeville.
Okay, so those are projects where the developer finds a site. They will have an off-taker or a contract that may be a county or two away.
Mhm.
It's not, this is another one of my pet peeves, is that they're not doing real renewable energy, which is to build close to load. And so we've seen projects, there's one in Rutland County, 500 kilowatts, right? Who's the off-taker? Goddard College.
Oh,
And it's like, really? So the PUC has tried in the updated net metering rule to require that at least 50% be used locally. It really should be much more, but the utilities are understanding now, building close to load makes sense. And so they go up to 500 kilowatt. Everything that's your rooftop, that's all net metered, and there is a profit margin in it that it goes above 15 cents, and these preferred sites get yet more money for them, which are raising the rates of everyone. I think it was last year that Green Mountain Power told us it's raising everybody's rates. Net metering was raising every one of their customers' rates something like $96 across the board. Now there is a
over
push.
the course of a year.
Yeah, over the course of a year. Now, there is a pushback to that from the renewable energy industry, and so there's always two sides to a story, and their pushback is, well, that, this is creating greater value to the environment, and we don't make people who use a lot of power pay a higher cost, and
That might be good.
I know, I think that would be good. Okay.
The business and commercial does pay a higher per kilowatt
Mhm.
than a residential.
Unless they're IBM and Global Foundries, and then they get their own
We don't have
special
those around
deals.
here. Right now, my campground was a lot higher.
Was it? Yeah.
Higher rate.
So the standard offer program is a program that started out with very high price power, 30 cents a kilowatt hour. And those projects are still making that money. They were programs that people with a lot of money invested in and are making a lot of money on. The original way that it was done was first come, first serve. And those ended up being not very good projects, and the PUC recognized that, and so then they made it a bid process. So there's a standard offer administrator, VEPI, and in April, they issue an RFP. The developers then go madly hunting for land to lease or rent or buy, and they have to show they have site control, and then they bid in, and the lowest bids are the ones that get the contracts. Now, as I detail in the white paper, a lot of those projects are not getting built. And so the standard offer program, in theory, is working because it is driving down costs. So those Bennington projects in 2014, their contracts were 13 cents, and now the bids going in are 8 to 10 cents. And so, but they're not getting built. And it has attracted some developers that's the only way they can do business, but
Do you think that it's because it's not profitable for them?
it's extremely profitable.
Then why wouldn't it?
Well, because the only way that merchant developers can build anything is either through the net metering program,
Mhm,
or through standard offer,
mhm.
or if they can get the utilities to sign a contract with them. But the utilities don't want to sign a contract with them because the utilities can do it more expensively or cheaper. So it's a dynamic that is, it used to be that Green Mountain Power would enter into contracts Now, they have to let anybody up on their grid, but they do not have to buy a merchant developer's power. And so over time, this is what's happened, is that the utility projects are cheaper power. And so why would they want to go buy power? So these developers, and many of them are from out of state, who have developed business models around standard offer, are getting their contracts, and then, but the way that they're choosing sites is not good. There was one in Brandon that was very opposed by the town, and it turned out that it had a 19th century water line running diagonally through it. And it was on their map that they put in, but they never even mentioned it in their testimony or anything. And so they ended up withdrawing it, because site control doesn't mean that you have to have looked at all the easements and all the underlying things. So that's another issue I have with the standard offer contract, is that there are other things, they're not necessarily good sites. All the Bennington sites that have standard offer contracts, there are 4 of the 5 sites that are by this one developer, are all forested. And, okay, 2 of them are on a 27-acre parcel, and 3 of them are on a 56-acre parcel. What's the cumulative impact if you actually start to cut all those forests? And there's nothing in the regulatory system right now that's addressed that. So this is my attempt at trying to figure out how to bring people together, sitting around a table, to work things out ahead of time before people file applications, before everybody lawyers up, before all the money is spent. Could we please just work together? I mean, we have Act 250. It already has the ability to have informal discussions. Isn't there a way that we could stop fighting over renewable energy siting and work in a more collaborative way? So this is a much bigger permit reform proposal that I put together 4 years ago. And it's got some interesting elements in it that are based on the idea that people ought to collaborate because people want renewable energy. And so why don't we come up with a process that enables that, where, hey, the utilities, the developers, the planners, the landowners, the neighbors, sit down and look at the issues. I mean, we've seen 150 kilowatt solar projects that have gone into a contested case at the Public Utility Commission, where quite literally, I'm guessing that just one hearing cost $50,000 to decide where to plant trees. It's absurd. And when you count all the lawyers and all the experts in the room, do we really have to use lawyers, no offense to lawyers, to fight over where to plant trees? And so I'm always trying to get away from the contested case and move towards a more collaborative process. And so if developers would come to towns early, if the utilities would actually work with the towns to figure out, that would make a whole lot more sense about how to do something if you want to do something.
Is that